Hi, I'm Jim Clark, Visual Arts Manager here at Hopkins Center for the Arts. Today we're speaking with Linda Deg Lee about her exhibition, Along the Continuum, on view now through October 19th, 2024. Linda, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Your paintings thrum with a certain energy that seems, both to me at least, organic and celestial, macroscopic and microscopic. It suggests cellular structures as well as distant supernovas. Is that an intentional move on your part?
Yeah, I would have to say so. I think along the lines of the microcosm as well as the macrocosm and how we are along the continuum, because that's sort of where I am in my path, my journey in life. And I like to see repeating patterns, meta patterns, and the fact that pattern, small, large, continue to evolve and change, and through the embryo to the universe, we have patterns that repeat, and that's what I focus on.
How did you arrive? As long as I've known your work, it has had this characteristic, stylistic signature. Was that something that you intentionally developed, or did you fall into it through experimentation along the way? Has your subject matter always been like this?
A little of both,
Yeah.
I guess. My eyesight is not very good. And so I found that when I had my glasses off, I had a whole different way of looking at the world. And it broke down into cellular patterns, especially filtered light. And I began to think about that in terms of composing a painting. How would I do that? And when I first started working in acrylic, I used to work in pastel, but acrylics gave me that really tight focus that I could use small brushes and that sort of thing. And I became quite obsessive about cellular kinds of things and linear kinds of things, trying to draw it instead of allowing it to be. And so yeah, this has been a long process of working with cellular, circular, spherical, symmetry, that kind of thing. It's been evolving for quite a while.
In either now or in the beginning, maybe, did you study images, microscopic images, or images from satellites of distant cosmic events? Or did it just kind of arrive?
Well, I've always been interested in science. So geology, botany, biology, physics, astronomy have always fascinated me, even though I don't understand, physics, it's hard. But I was just taken by the kinds of patterns and what the world is made up of, what the cosmos is made up of, and it's just so enchanting, especially when you look at water and the kinds of things that happen with reflection in water, what's going on under the water, how sand shifts, how erosion can change. Those are the kinds of natural phenomenon that I've always been really interested in.
It's interesting you say that. There's been recent news items and maybe studies on artists' intuitive understanding of elements of physics, like Van Gogh recently. There's been a lot of talk about how the patterns in Starry Night are a very accurate model of the physics of turbulence.
Yes.
Do you has your work ever spurred you on or into doing more scientific research, or are you happy to keep it more a feeling thing?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the physics, I appreciate the mathematics, but I don't try to replicate that in any way. I'm just turned on by it.
Yeah.
And I want to explore the possibilities in paint.
Sure.
And so that's where I leave it. I used to use symmetry quite a bit in my work, and either reflective symmetry, we are symmetrical, or radial symmetry, and sometimes spheres and that kind of thing, to show momentum, to show how one point can become a line, can become a plane, as Kandinsky said. But beyond that, I'm just happy to be working with the paint and what the paint can do. Sure. It's very freeing.
Viewers and visitors to the gallery have remarked on the textural aspects of the work and marvel and wonder about process. So how, when you speak of the symmetrical aspects of it, can you talk about your process and how you get some of these painterly effects?
Oh yeah, well, I used to try to draw it out, what was going on in my head, the idea that I had. I tried to draw that out, and it just became so obsessive that I just had to pull back from that and say, how can I make this a more interesting conversation that I'm having with the paint? And so I started using, I used water for a time, where I work with acrylic, and I would let that dry to a certain point, and then I would just hit it with water, let it dry a little bit more, wipe it off, and you'd have these lovely little things. Well, isopropyl alcohol does the same sort of thing. And you start to have, you lose control, first of all, which is a lovely thing. For me, anyway, because it was really important for me to let go of that obsessiveness and find the joy in my painting. And so the isopropyl alcohol really helped me do that. I would put something down, and then I would walk away, come back maybe 20 minutes later, half hour later, and see what happened. And I was surprised and exhilarated by it. So that began to be much more important than actually trying to say anything more than that. It was just the joy of creating something fun with isopropyl alcohol.
So it sounds to me like originally you were more strategic about, you were trying to plan things out, and as you engage with the process, you move more
less
and
so
more.
important.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I still would have a structure, and I relied heavily on horizon lines. I'm from North Dakota, so horizon lines are a big deal. And it was comforting to have that horizon line there. The same thing with being close to the ocean, and how you have this incredible gravitational force of the water. So that began to be my most, the kind of structure that I would put together easily, so that I could just work on the bands of color and overlaying color to create 3 dimensions. That way you could come through and see what was underneath and realize that there were other things, other meta patterns behind you and in front of you, that you're a part of this ongoing, moving thing.
How important is it to you that the viewer gets that? I'll put "gets" in quotes, but maybe intellectually understanding. I mean, are you invested in that?
No, not really. I'm just pleasing myself at this point. It's nice, and I try to relate to an audience or to a viewer. I think underneath we all understand. We're all going through this life together, and there are certain signals along the way. Splashes and horizon lines and those kinds of things evoke memories for everyone, but I don't dwell on that, and it's just more about what pleases me.
When you're working on these, how often, if ever, does something just not work out?
Never.
Never?
Never. No. And the thing with especially acrylic is that, if something isn't going in the direction that you intended, maybe you should think about that. Because there could be something there that if you just give it a little bit of time, open your mind a little bit, there might be something there to take. But otherwise, you can always paint over it. I very seldom paint over it, though. There's always something there, and that you can take and grow with. That I found, anyway.
Sure.
Put another layer on, for God's sakes.
When you speak of using the isopropyl alcohol with the acrylic, can you describe what it does?
It's just a joy.
Yeah.
There are so many ways that you can do it, and I'm still in the midst of finding all of those ways. But basically, you have to have a fairly thin paint surface, and then you allow that alcohol to do its thing against water. It will repel the water. So you have to know how thick and how thin and how much and how little. And it's all just trial and error. And that's half the fun.
And with that repulsion, it creates some of the blooming action?
Yes, yeah. I use all sorts of different tools. I'll use, little brushes. I'll use little droppers. I'll use little spears. It just depends on how small I want to make that surface to be and how I want that to interact. But usually I'll actually just dump it on sometimes, or hit it with my hand with, it gets kind of visceral sometimes, but it's the surprise that I'm looking for, So.
Do you then, it appears to me, but it's hard to say, do you then go in and overpaint some areas to accentuate some of those elements, or to maybe sometimes attenuate them a little bit?
Sometimes I will go back in, especially if I have layers underneath. Then I can talk back to that layer. And I'll wait until the paint film dries a little bit, and then I'll actually wipe it off. Because the edges around the paint will dry first, and that pool will stay wet in the center, so then you can just wipe it off, and then you've got these beautiful little hollow pieces, which are a joy as well. This is all made of you have to kind of look at askance, but these are all little hollow pieces where I've just wiped it off, and it makes a little shape. So that's kind of fun too. Half the fun is just seeing what it'll do. That's kind of where I'm at.
Some of the work is on panel and some is on canvas. Do you have a preference for ground?
And that has changed. Again, it's part of the evolution from moving to working with paint and brushes to working with the alcohol and letting the paint speak. But working on a panel gives you that just lovely, smooth surface, and the paint can just do what it wants to do. It doesn't get caught in the tooth of the fabric. This one is done on canvas, and it's a pretty heavy canvas, and I really had to pool a lot of paint in there so that I could get the kinds of shapes that I wanted. Whereas if I work on a panel, it's just right there because it's just so smooth, you know. So I prefer that.
You spoke of growing up in North Dakota and the impression that the sky to the earth and the horizon had on, I'll say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but kind of your aesthetic sense, your natural inborn aesthetic sense. And I know you've lived in Austin, Texas, and New York City, and now in Minnesota. Have you picked up elements of the local geography at every stop, or
Yes.
You have?
Oh yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, you know, North Dakota kind of speaks for itself with the, the horizon lines. And I come from the southwestern part of North Dakota, so there are a lot of buttes and the Badlands and that whole thing. So, you know, that's that. Although this is actually Sedona. Sedona is known as a dark city. I don't know. Yeah. So, yeah, it's dark. Yeah, I love the ocean. And when I first moved to Austin, I was working in pastel, and I was just taken with the hill country and the vibrancy and the colors. And pastels just suited me so much because I could just, you know, go to these drawers and pick out these lovely colors and paint that way. When I was living in New York City, I was still painting in pastel because I didn't have a studio. But moving here, the lakes and the water and the forests and the trees all had an impact on my art as well. And I feel comfortable. I like to be up near lake country, up at Lake of the Woods in that area. So yeah, again with the horizon lines because it's water, but it's that, you know, the glistening and the reflection and all of that was really beautiful.
Do you still work in pastel at all, or are you just 100% acrylic now?
I may go back to it again. I miss certain aspects of it, you know, working with my hands. I love working with my hands. Mm-hmm. But for now, I'm happy doing this kind of thing. We'll see, you know.
From back to the conception of a work or not, you used to kind of plan it out and draw it out, it sounds like. Now, do you have an idea? I mean, whether it's like, well, this is going to be a radial approach, or it's going to be strata. How planned are you?
I do think about the kind of feeling that I want the painting to have and choosing the colors, choosing the composition. Is it going to be an active kind of composition? But I will think about the idea more in a conceptual way, mm-hmm. and then from there it can morph into however the paint is laying on the canvas, on the panel. So it just depends on what happens, and then I try to stay open enough. Mm-hmm. That's really important for me now, to stay open to wherever the panel takes me. And then I'll move in that direction.
In your conceptual driver, is it purely visual, or is there a verbal aspect of it? Do you write anything down that you're chasing?
I sketch quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
I'll do preliminary sketches just to get a feel for movement. Mm-hmm. Primarily, if there are going to be several kinds of structures within it. Right now I'm working on the concept of fish moving through water, mm-hmm. and how or birds, as they move through the air and how they place themselves as they're going through the air. Everybody has their place and they're moving through as one. Mm-hmm. That kind of thing captures my attention, and I don't know what that's going to look like, but that's the concept that I have. In
color choice, each one has a distinctive palette, but there's also like a through thread, it feels like, in a way that you use color. How do you arrive at the palette for any given work?
Traditionally, I've tried to stick with earth colors. I like ochres and siennas, and blue is such an intense, lovely pigment, you know, the family of blues, that I'll often use blue because it just has such good tinting strength. But I prefer earth colors.
What's the most challenging aspect for you working as an artist?
Oh gosh, probably fear.
And tell us more.
Well, you know, I mean, there is that well, when you're not totally ready to engage because you're not really sure if this is going to work, is it going to be a success? Am I going to be able to do this, to pull this off? You doubt yourself a little bit and maybe you pull back. That's challenging, and I have to overcome that. So it's best if you just push forward and push into that fear. And then 9 times out of 10, it's like, what was I afraid of?
Yeah.
You know?
You told me you never had a bummer, so it must
No.
be 10 times out of 10. They always work out.
I don't know. I don't know. Some better than others.
Do you have that period of fear in every work?
No. No, but if I'm trying something new, right now, like I say, I've got this idea, this concept, and I have yet to figure out exactly how that's going to look. And so I'm just letting it kind of percolate before I'm ready to start on something. How big is it going to be? What kind of format is it going to be in? How will I take care of that particular border against that border? There's all kinds of little questions that I have to sort of figure out, or at least feel like when I get there, it'll be there. You know, that kind of thing, and I'm hopeful. So.
Have you always been an artist?
Yeah, I've since I was a little kid. And my family was very supportive, and I always had materials and the time and the space and the encouragement. So I was lucky. Yeah.
Cool. Let's open it up to questions.
So you said that you combine physics and all of this. My dad is actually a professor of theater, was a professor of theoretical physics, and my mom is actually an artist specializes in your field of acrylic and pastel.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. Little synchronicity there, huh?
I have 2 questions for you. The first is in the process area again about the alcohol and the water. It seemed like you said you started with water and then evolved to alcohol, but it sounded like you were using them both together.
Yes, initially when I started working in acrylics, I was just acrylics, you know, straight acrylics. And I wanted to develop more textures and more interesting surfaces that I could layer up and create something much more interesting. And that's when I started actually flinging water on there, letting it dry, wiping it off, and then I would get that. Well, isopropyl alcohol will do that even while it's wet, and in fact it pushes against the alcohol so much that it creates all these wonderful little tumbling kinds of things. That's when I really started using alcohol along with the acrylic paint. So I apply the acrylic first, and then I go in and will open up certain areas in that blob of paint, and then it will push back and create something entirely new.
Do you use water at the same time?
I'll use water when I'm mixing up the pigment so that it's kind of a sloppy, not too watery, but enough that it'll act against the alcohol. So there's kind of a fine line. You have to kind of develop your own sense of what that is. But then it's dropping the alcohol on, and then it will push away, and you get these unintentional, kind of exciting little floating pieces.
Yeah, that sounds
It's fun. Yeah.
Sounds unique. The second question is about being from North Dakota, and your work seemed to me kind of spiritual, and seemed to have almost a native indigenous people influence somewhat.
Well, I never thought of it like that, but you know, I think in terms of the magic in the world, the mystical properties, the unknown, those are the kinds of things I think as artists that we seek out. Knowledge, especially knowledge given to us from our lives and from this world. I think that's what I am drawing from in my own way. Yeah.
And I think that's how the indigenous people feel too.
Reacting to their world, their environment. Yeah. Yeah, you're right.
To kind of jump on to that one a little bit, the process, Linda, how long did it take you to acquire or develop that sense of the right amount of water, the right amount of alcohol? Were your initial experiments in this process, was it like right off the bat you were getting magic, or did it take some time?
No, there is a lot of experimentation that I had to get through, and primarily it was moving from canvas to panel. That solved a lot of problems for me. If you look at redfish over here, redfish is basically like a baby swimming pool, only square, and it was just filled with this whole pool of pigment, red, blue, yellow. And then off of that, I found these channels, and that's another meta pattern that I use a lot, is branching. When things branch and become something else. I use that quite a bit on redfish, and if you look closely at it, you can see that I'm actually creating all that tight conglomerate of circles, of cells. And I just got to a point on redfish where I said, geez, I can't do this anymore. This is going to kill me. So that's when I started working with alcohol on redfish. He had to wait about a year or so before I could finally get to a point where I knew that I had to bring the alcohol into that painting, because he didn't have it before. So yeah, it's a constant evolution.
Well, Linda, here I am with the mic, and you answered pretty much the question I was just going to ask. So now I'll just get down in the weeds just a little bit more.
Please.
And I'm interested in the surfaces, the difference between the two surfaces. Your work is so unified and soft and just goes together, and yet each one is so different. How would, if you had a canvas and a wood surface with an idea and you started out the same on both of them, what direction would you go from there to?
Wow. I can only answer in a general kind of way, in that I lay down a surface, a background surface that I can play off of. So depending on what the surface is like, if it has a lot of texture, that's going to tell me something. and then I can react to that and take that. If there are little channels of grain in the wood, you know, maybe that needs to be explored. If it's something that's flat and the paint can be manipulated somehow, that might be something to be explored. But I think they're handled differently depending on the substrate that you
Like
have.
the weave of the canvas and the grain of the wood.
Yes, yes, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
You're reacting to all of that. Yeah, yeah.
I just had a question about how much are you using or thinking about color theory, or are you at all when you're doing these? Because I find color really challenging, so I'm just wondering how
I
you
do too. Yeah,
think
I do
about
too.
it.
Yeah, I try to stay within a family of colors, and then oftentimes what I'll do is if I have another color that's maybe not quite adjacent to it, I will try to use like a tertiary color that will homogenize those two just a little bit to the eye, just enough that it'll bring it into the same family. That kind of thing I'll do.
It sounds like have you studied color theory?
I would have to say I haven't. I go by my own instincts and
Sure.
what feels right to me.
But you use that 25-cent tertiary word. That suggests some fluency in that realm. As Joan is asking, for some people the idea of color is a mystery, and for others they were born with that natural intuition and just talent, and then others acquired it through study of color theory, but they drilled it in practice to the point that it spills out naturally,
Yeah,
as
that it
if
feels
they were
natural.
born with it.
Yeah, yeah.
Where are you on that spectrum?
I would have to say that I fly by the seat of my pants on that. You know, I really don't. It's just whatever feels right to me.
Yeah.
So I.
Does your color sense, as it's expressed in your acrylic paintings, is there a through thread visually to your pastel works? Did you develop this sense of color in your pastel works, or is this a departure?
I never thought about that, but I guess I would have. I would have been influenced by the colors, the palette that I had in Texas. I think that it would have. Although, pastels can be, supercharged, and so I kind of back away from that in acrylic. But
hopefully, we got there for you, Joan. However, I did want to ask, inspiration-wise, do you have other artists that you admire, have gained influence from, refer to as beacons of practice? I know you brought a couple of books.
I did. These were basically because I have been thinking about how I can free myself and work more spontaneously and bring more joy into my work. And I just found that this was just such a helpful book. Rick Rubin's The Creative Act. I love that. And then this book from the 90s, Meta Patterns, just blew my mind. He's a physicist and teaches at NYU. Tyler Volk is his name, Tyler Volk. And he talks about meta patterns in terms of not only physics and astronomy, but architecture and music, and that there are patterns that we all understand as human beings. The sphere, the line, branching, sheets, and circles. He goes through the whole gamut. And I just found that was a light bulb for me, because I was also interested in pattern making and the evolution of patterns. And so his book was, he's not an artist, but but it meant a great deal to me. As far as influences, Kandinsky and Paul Klee. Initially, I was very attracted to the Blue Rider group, and but now one of my favorite artists, and gosh, she's getting up there, Yayoi Kusama, does these, beautiful pattern making, circular, lots of circles, but nets and repetitive patterns. She's Japanese, yes, yeah. Yeah, she's wonderful, and yeah, I admire her a great deal. Bridget Riley is another one. Yeah. So it comes out of different places, I guess.
Drawing inspiration not just from visual experience, but from reading. And Tyler Folk, not an artist. Rick Rubin, famously as a producer, he doesn't play a single musical instrument, but you're finding great inspiration about how he thinks about the creative act.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It was very freeing for me. This whole process, working with alcohol and allowing myself to have a conversation with the paint, came from, at least was triggered by some of the things that he said. Not having the fear, letting go of the fear, and allowing things to, being open to the process, and any new processes that come along, embrace them. Yeah.
Cool. Linda, thank you so much for sharing your work
you're
with our community.
most welcome. It's my pleasure.
We've been speaking with Linda Deg Lee about her exhibition Along the Continuum, on view now through October 19th, 2024. Oh, good.